Hi, I'm Terrence Arjun. I'm the manager of 192 Books, and we are here to celebrate the launch of Architecture Research Office, a monograph from DelMonico and DAP. Um, and Architecture Research Office, ARO, is a New York City firm united by their collaborative process, commitment to accountable action, and social and environmental responsibility. Their architecture unites beauty and form with strategy and intelligence. Its philosophy has earned the firm over 100 design awards, including the 2020 AIA Architecture Firm Award, the AIA New York State Firm of the Year Award, and the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Architecture. We have here Adam Yarinsky. Correct. FAIA is a lecturer at MIT and is taught at Harvard University, the University of Michigan, Princeton University, Yale University, the University of Virginia, and other institutions. He has also lectured widely and written about ARO's work. Adam served on the board of Places Journal and the University of Virginia School of Architecture Dean's Advisory Board. Angela Estevez joined ARO in 2016 and is responsible for crafting the firm's narrative and advancing its work. Before ARO, she worked on the Highline book. We stocked that book. And the business development team at Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. Angela holds a BA in Architecture Studies from Brown University. Adam and Angela will be conversing with Miko Mcginty, who began designing art books in 1993. Her first book, Isamu Noguchi Essays and Conversations, established her deep commitment to working with artists, curators, scholars, and museums. Her studio of 4 designers includes Rebecca Silvers, lead designer for the ARO book. They have created books for numerous artists in more than 40 museums worldwide. Since 2020, Miko has taught in the architecture department at MIT. This event is being live streamed on YouTube and will be archived on the PCG Studio website. The book is available for sale. There will be a conversation and then a Q&A, and then you can buy some books because this is a bookstore. 192 Books. I'll pass it over to Mika. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll be picking them out from my seat. Okay, is that good for the audio? Close enough? Okay. Welcome, everyone. There's a lot of people here from the book team, and thank you all for coming. We're talking tonight just with Adam and Angela, but there are others here who may have perspective to shout out, but then we'll have to repeat everything into the microphone also so the YouTubers can hear it. This is the book we're talking about today. It's structured around 7 principles, and we're going to structure this talk around those 7 principles as well. You can look at your bookmark for a preview if you want to see what we're doing in this talk. We're going to pass these around like school. Like, take one and pass it around. Inside the book, we arranged the projects that are shown within each of the 7 principles. We distributed them throughout. The text and the images in the sections are designed to illuminate how those projects speak to the principles at hand, but they're also to talk more broadly about the different projects and bring out the stories. At the front of the book, there's an essay by Brooke Hodge, who is an architectural historian and curator. There's photography of the office by Jason Schmidt, who's an artist and a photographer. And at the end of the book, there's a conversation between the 3 partners that's really illuminating and excellent. You guys asked if I'd explain my firm a little bit. We design books for the art world, many, many books with artists, and I have, as the intro says, a deep belief in like what we're doing and taking art and the interpretation of art and putting it into the book form. I brought this Klaus Oldenburg Strange Eggs book, which we had an event here with Klaus now many years ago, but when he was alive, but it's a really special book. And these are the kind of books that we also do. I think for me, we feel very passionately about art and artists, and I feel the same way about ARO, about the integrity of the work and taking, I think it's a big responsibility to make a book about an artist monograph or about this firm at this point. I think we have the book from 2002 here. So this is the 2002 book. It's excellent, but it's also, there's 20 more years of like work and thinking and office development, and so we needed to make a new book. I think it was really time. So we're going to begin. You can check your bookmarks. We're going to begin with strategize for maximum impact. And so for this one, I think sort of coming off of looking at the 2002 book and thinking about making a new book, I wasn't around for the beginning sections of the discussion about the book, and I was wondering if you guys would talk about what it was like. What were you thinking about?
Sure. Well, it's funny. I mean, of course, we started the process by thinking we don't want to do a monograph, as everyone says at the beginning, and then you become comfortable with the fact that you're actually, ultimately that doesn't matter what you call it, but you're trying to talk about, who you are and the ethos of our firm and our people. So, but we started thinking about it at least a decade before, it was published, I would say. And certainly when you came into the office, it was already.
Which was about a decade ago.
Yeah. I guess the thing that I think about in terms of the correlation to the strategize for maximum impact principle in the book is, why do a book at all? So, and I think in a way it relates to you and the capabilities and the talents that you and your team brought to the process, which was how do we create something that is not a building, but that expresses our ethos and does it in a way that correlates to our values. So that was important.
There was a lot of reflection and pressure built into also the 20-year gap between the last and first book.
Right, it was like 10 years, yes. But then now it's 20. So.
Now it's 20. But when I joined ARO, this was also talked about sort of like my very first interview, and it really took that long to sort of see it through fruition, which was really great. But in that time, like in the past 10 years, the office has changed. Throughout the book project, which took a couple years, the office also changed, and we had a bunch of different milestones. And so there was definitely this constant reflection of where are we at now, where are we going, and what should this book as a book sort of communicate?
That's right. Yeah. What do we want to communicate, and also who do we want to communicate it to?
Yeah.
So, which we were clear that it was going to be ourselves, our peers, but also people who are not architects, and also people who are students. So that was important, and that made it in a way more complicated to think about how do we communicate to those different audiences in the same book.
I feel like when we started the project, we opened it, and this is your own process, I think, as a firm, you opened it up. Research, like we looked at a lot of books. It was COVID, so we were often on Zoom, but I went around, I was at my parents' house, I went around and took pictures of my dad's architecture library of the books that I thought would be the most interesting to talk about, and we did slideshows, and we really tried to open it up for what could it be. I think we talked a lot about what you hear from people about ARO, and how the curiosity people have about how you organize the business, like how do you run a studio like this? How do you have your values are seen by the broader world, and how do we incorporate that? We had a moment when I was like, maybe we can do a book where you explain all that, because I would love to know how to do this. I have a design firm too, So I think there was like a total architecture research office research phase that was really exciting, and a little bit because of COVID, maybe, that we had a little time on Zoom to spend on the conversation. And then, the audience, which you were just talking about, thinking broadly, like really, we do this in graphic design all the time. Who is the audience who's going to be looking at it, at the cover? Who's going to pick it up? Where are they going to be? So thinking about it in terms of bookness that way. I think we also talked a little bit about, this would happen also, we talked about some of the parallels in architecture and books, but books are a big deal. A monographic book for an artist is a really, really big deal. And that's one of the things that Rebecca and I, when we're working, or our office is working with an artist, we really feel that emotion, the gravity of this, like that it's a big deal, that it's going to change how the artist is seen potentially. If we do a really good job, the book will do work outside of like once it's released into the world, and sort of bringing that to this process was really important.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think what for me personally was part of the process was getting comfortable with the fact that even though we concentrate on making buildings and we don't know that much about making books, we don't do that ourselves, that there was a value to the book as a way of talking about, the buildings that we make. And so, it's sort of in retrospect seems obvious, but at the time it was sort of a struggle to understand, what we were trying to communicate beyond, of course, the fact that we love making architecture, and the process of how we do it, but how to get deeper than that. And realizing it was going to be a lot of work to do that, I think, as we got further into it, we're like, this is pretty intense. There's a lot to think about, a lot to consider.
Yeah. It was definitely interesting between like Miko and Rebecca, your expertise in bookmaking, and Adam and the partners sort of just like having this very clear vision of how to talk about architecture. And then my day-to-day role is really like, how am I talking about the office and presenting the story of the office and the projects, but in very different formats. And so between the website or just like potential projects, which Alex and Allison, that's what we work on every day, there's definitely a lot of reflection and sort of, there's definitely a specialness to a book as a fixed item, like it's an object. There's a lot in there that's sort of about a moment in time, but obviously we want it to matter, months later after book launch, or like a couple years in the future, maybe 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So that was a cool prompt to just sort of do a lot of that, but also working with an external team and working with like the book team, but also Zach, and sort of doing a lot of that with other people outside of the office.
Which is the perfect role to, number 2, approach architecture as a social act. So for this, my reading of this is about the collaboration. Like, this book is a big collaboration. And I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about how you built the team for the project. We have like a list of all the different groups, which we can all, we'll hit some of them and we'll just make sure we get everybody. But it's pretty amazing, actually, how the team was built for this project, I think.
Yeah, and again, it mirrored how we go about making buildings in terms of engaging our clients as collaborators and thought partners, or people who are using the project or whose it affects, but also specialists and consultants and things like that, but which is usually grounded in a real respect for the capabilities and the things that these people can bring to the project. And so certainly in working with you, not to make this a complete love fest, but that was something that really mattered to us. We could see the care that you took in what you make, and that you're really expert at doing it, and that you were open to having a dialogue about what we could create together that didn't exist in a form that we knew, about. There wasn't a precedent for us in it. So it was a searching process and a process of learning and inquiry that, you were ideal really to work with in that respect.
Miko was one of the first people that we talked to early on in the book project. And I think, Stephen, this was you, where you said, whoever it is, we're going to spend a lot of time with them, so we should actually have fun spending time with them, which was very, very true, and it definitely worked out.
So the internal team, Angela and Neil Patel, the partners, and more. There's more internal team inside the office from the sort of origin part. Our team, we had Rebecca Silvers, who's here, who's the lead designer on the project, and Tina Henderson, who's our typesetter, so she also worked with us on it. Mary DelMonico, who is our publisher, who's here. She was an absolutely essential partner for many reasons, bring into this project. Let's see, Phil Mariani, who was our copy editor, who came through you. Diana Murphy, who is an amazing architecture editor who I have worked with since since 1993, actually. I worked with her at Abrams, and I've followed her career for many years. Brooke Hodge, who's the architectural historian and author, and she wrote a journalistic piece. She did interviews with so many people in the office. So again, bringing in voices and community and perspective. She recommended Jason Schmidt to do photography in the office, to sort of capture visually what the story that we were trying to tell about how the office works. You have all the existing photography that you did, like extraordinary photographers. Also, for over the whole 20 years, documenting the projects. That work is a huge part. I mean, it's like hugely part of the book. We had another photographer, Kyle, who came in and also helped with the office. Zach DiGilio, who's our writer, who was an MIT architecture student when I first met him, but he turned out to be he had shined as a collaborator in many MIT publications already, so I knew at the point where you had finished school and this project needed another writer that you were the right person to bring in, and that was its own pleasure working with the team. Okay, our printer, incredible printer. I think we'll talk about the printer in a little bit. DAP, sales, marketing, distribution. Those are the people we worked with and more. Rebecca and I were talking about all the people who did the special drawings inside the book too, inside the office. It's a lot of people to make a book like this. Anyone I forgot? Sorry. There's more.
Neil Patel and Melissa Barstow definitely spearheaded all of the hundreds of drawings that are in this book project, and a lot of them existed and were sort of updated, but then there was definitely a lot of creation of new drawings, and so that was definitely this huge undertaking that definitely paid off.
Well, in a way, that's our next point, because the next one is engage the complexity of context. So my book interpretation of this is, okay, there were a lot of potential books. There was the existing material that you had, the photography you already had, the website, the lectures, the talks, other kinds of communication you were already doing. But how did we find our focus, or how did we bring together all the different diverse kinds of material in the book? And what do you think about that piece of this making?
Well, one of the things I'm excited about is the book mirrors and embodies qualities of our buildings in the sense that there's a series of layers and relationships between the parts. And so you can enter into the book in a variety of different ways, and you can find connections between things. So number one, of course, the principles and the projects that are under them. Projects could be under different principles. There's a kind of set of interrelationships between those principles. How we define them specifically is, embodied in some of the work that's under them. But so it's that kind of layering, or that sort of multiple kind of threads that are interwoven, which I think is really interesting and exciting. And it's not something that I anticipated when you have a structure at the beginning, but the way in which it weaves together, I think, is really satisfying for me.
The process itself was also very layered. We definitely had a lot of, conversations that could have felt circular, sort of like we were talking about the same thing, but there were still different nuances that kept coming up out of all of those. But I think it's also the process turned inward. And so from collaboration, from building the team, but also turning the sort of research and archiving on ourselves was this really interesting deep dive. And so it's also just understanding how the book would be received by different types of audiences, but also knowing that a reader could just dive in depending on how much they wanted to. Someone could flip through and just look at the photos, and that's one story, or someone could actually read through every single caption, which some people I know here have, which is great. I think Zach and I really appreciate that. But there's these two simultaneous, there's the overarching editorial story, but there's definitely the textual story. So the writing was really important, and then the different types of visual stories between the drawings and the photos, which of course matters for any architecture book, but it's also just different layers of creativity.
Yeah, and what you had to work with were, hundreds of photographs, if not.
For every project.
Yeah. And drawings and process material. And so the final result, where there's a really careful editing and selection, but then there's this kind of storytelling that happens through, and clear narrative that you can, you don't have to even read the captions or the description to understand in a way each project. And given the diversity of projects, that's really hard to do because they're not all the same project type or program type. And the sites vary widely. So that was something that I just hadn't anticipated, it's in a way that the elegance with which that and ends up being kind of effortless at the end, I think, in terms of just the narrative flow of each project and the larger book.
Yeah, like the design process is cutting from so many possibilities to the best possibility that you can come up with in this moment, in this flow, in this context. So that was really fun to do.
And again, at our best work, I mean, that's exactly what we strive for, that you do all of this work, but the end result feels effortless. You step away from it, someone can look at it without you having to explain anything.
Yeah.
And it's simply there, to be experienced directly. So, yeah.
The drawings, it's 20 years of drawings. So all different styles, different programs, different kinds of drawings were the source material. So that endeavor itself was this huge, huge push of to make them all look amazing together, basically to redraw and to bring them all to the same moment. It's so satisfying, though, as a designer. It's really fun. So that was a great process. We didn't do any of it. We just enjoyed the labor that you guys put into it. Okay, number 4, elevate the ordinary. In the beginning of the project, we did a tour and we visited many of the spaces in the book in New York. So we went over to Dia, we went to Judd. These are places I had been. As someone in the art world, these are places I really appreciated, but going with you guys was incredibly special to explain the subtlety of the design and the incredible craftsmanship, material choices, the invisibility of some of your biggest decisions, which is a little bit parallel. Like when we do a good job, our best choices are totally invisible. But like Judd was incredible to me. Even by the end, I was still like, I looked at one of those pictures that we have in the book of it stripped all the way down, and I was like, is this true? This is like years in. I knew it was true, but it's still so incredible. I remember thinking of this about Kim, like talking to Kim. I was like, we have to print this, like amazing. If they can make these buildings look like this, we have to print this so that the printing itself, the object itself, can hold a candle to what you're making in terms of buildings. What did you find the most interesting about part of making a physical book? Like, what part of that was interesting to you guys?
The example I'll give, which kind of embodies all of this, is the cover, and which was this kind of process that started with kind of, of course, everyone says don't judge a book by its cover, but fundamentally, it's really important. So it started with we can't have an image of a project on it because there are 30 plus projects in there, and why would one be on the cover? Then it was, well, let's show a detail, but it could be a photograph of a detail, but then that seemed too specific to the project, and then it was the drawing of a detail. And we've always been interested in pattern and surface, and so then it was, okay, let's pick a pattern from a very early project we did, probably one of the first ones we did in 1996. That's called an isohedral monohedral tiling pattern. And but then it was, okay, what should the scale of that pattern be on the page? And all of the different iterations of scale that could have. And then what color should that ink be? And the kind of fabric of the material of the cover underlying that was something that, for me at least, was kind of an homage to the Oeuvre Complete and kind of great books of the 50s and 60s that have kind of natural linen covers or fabric covers. And then having done that, of course, it's the text going on top of it. We have a photo of us, all of us, looking at a table full of actual test prints from the printer on the actual several different types of fabric. So, we're either out of our mind or I guess just obsessed. Maybe it was a shared psychosis.
Definitely obsessed.
Yeah. But, so yeah.
And the printer too. Yeah, so Trifolio is our printer, and they're always very willing to do this kind of testing. Like the craftsmanship that Trifolio achieves is really in the same zone. Like that was essential to have a good match. Someone who'd go into this. I know that, by then I knew you really well. By the time we were doing the cover, Rebecca and I both knew you really well. So we knew how you'd be able to look at the different cloth colors, which were very similar, and understand how the ink color on that cloth was quite different according to, and we wouldn't know until we tested. So we did the testing. And then also because you are super visually sophisticated to work with, you could also choose, which was the other part, that sometimes we just are choosing some things that someone might not be as sensitive to, but you're very sensitive to exactly this kind of question. So we knew that we had to design this process so that everyone would participate. It was fun. It was actually fun.
It was also at the end of it, like it turned the whole process more tactile. And so it was like we were looking at physical samples. We were looking at, as Miko said, super subtle differences between all of these different possible covers. At one point, there were different color options, but I think the green was pretty spot on early on. But that was also at one point, like, I think for me, I saw all the partners also just lock in. It's like, oh, right, this is just like sort of any other design meeting. Like, you know what you need to do, you know the assignment, like the decision, you'll talk about it, but like it will be clear and it's like an easy enough decision to make. And so that was very interesting. That was another interesting component of the amazing cover part. But I think throughout the whole book also, I think I spent a lot of time with all three partners, and I still learned something new throughout these many, many hours of conversations and reflecting back on different projects and different aspects of projects that don't always make their way into like the website or just a narrative about a project.
Well, that's the other thing. When you were talking early on in the process of planning the book, Miko was saying, the book, you can communicate information in a variety of different ways now. So what distinguishes a book? And with respect to the cover, I mean, it's making a beautiful object,
Right.
on some level that you want to pick up and that's attractive and that has some integrity on its own. So that's why there was this very intense, process to go about how to achieve that, and doing it together, was really fun.
Zach had to be on Zoom for that. And I was like, you didn't get to touch anything. You were just like,
Yeah.
Design for use and experience. Okay, now the book is done. What do you think about it as it goes out into the world? Do you have thoughts about how this experience has been since we published?
Wow. I'm trying to remember if I've thought about this before.
This is my surprise question for you. Sorry.
I think we keep getting photos of people seeing it out in the wild. And so I think even when here at 192 Books, when the book first came, I think we are tracking all of those photos and we're going to compile them into something special someday. But I think that's always fun, and that's fun for anyone who's ever worked in the office. I think seeing it out in the wild, like we also have a list of everyone who ever worked at the office. And so I think if wherever you are in the United States or around the world, if you open this book and you flip to the back, like hopefully you will see your name. But the other thing is that I think since this book was published in October, I think a lot has changed also just in terms of like, there have been a lot of changes in the office, or a lot of like, obviously like these global shifts. But it's nice. It was nice flipping through this morning after spending a very long time away from it. And there's still a lot in this book project that speaks to the office and the way that it practices, which is very sort of illuminating and refreshing, and this guiding light, I think, as the office continues to change.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I actually didn't look at the book for like four to 5 months afterwards, just to kind of give it a break. But in the last few weeks, looking at it more, and I agree. I mean, I think it's the ethos of the firm that, comes through, which is what I think is nice to be able to share with people. And and then to enter into it, as I was saying earlier, you can go into it by a project, or you can look at, understand it more of an explanation of the narrative, written narrative in the book. And I guess as it goes out into the world, whatever the world is these days, it's that realizing that everyone understands buildings differently, and not everyone reads drawings and understands what they are. So the photographs are helpful, but also the writing is really good, I think, for finding another way, an avenue into understanding what we're trying to do. So for those who want to read, those parts of the book, that's really great as it's out there.
I really hope that it works. Like for the people who are really curious about how the firm works and how the values of the firm flow through all the projects and the methods and everything, like we really tried to answer those. And so I guess that would be something I'm really curious about, is like when people who aren't as familiar but who have this curiosity, are they able to get that from the book? Because that, is something we had worked really hard on. And the sort of admiration I feel for the deeply held values of this firm and the internal articulation of it. Like, did we really capture that for someone coming from outside? I really hope that continues to be something useful, and something we talked about a lot for us in the beginning too, as other kinds of designers. Like, finding out about your design values was really important to us. Speaking of values, work with integrity, number 6. So for this, I thought that maybe the question here could be, as partners, you guys wrote the principles together. I think, do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
We all have different perspectives on that. But I think we initially thought that the principles would be written by another person. And we realized after that process started that we actually needed to articulate that. Of course, it seems obvious in hindsight. So there was the process of all of us just realizing that very deeply. And then it was a not terribly labored process. Maybe I've selective memory, as Steven says. But it was very iterative, and then there was this process of every single sentence, every single word in that sentence, and then not being repetitive. And of course, it was edited subsequently as well. But and so it wasn't just the three of us; it was Angela and Zach, and so it was intense. But in a way, a thing that we carried through when we make architecture is we're super persistent. Like, we don't stop. And so if it's not right, or if someone felt it wasn't right, we weren't going to, just let it sit and accept it as, as that's what it is because we ran out of time or something like that. So we just kept plugging away. But fortunately I've forgotten most of it now. But yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to write mission statements or these kinds of statements, but they turned out amazing, I think, really showing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, or we certainly thought about at the time, is like, on one level, these 7 statements are truisms, and they maybe even seem very general. So trying to define what specific to us about them mattered through the work and also through the wording that we used to try to explain that. So that kind of specificity is another attribute of how we engage problems. We try to be as specific as we can, and hopefully there's depth of meaning that comes out of that process. But you don't get there right away. It takes a while to get there, to distill that.
It was also meant to be, early on, there was definitely discussion about could this be just a textbook, a book that was purely text. And I think in some ways, there was also the prompt of, is there an overarching narrative to the story of the office and also the projects? And so that was the initial prompt of these principles. And so however you read them, you could read them about the projects, but you could also read them about the office too. And I think in many ways, it's also just sort of, I think as someone who works in the office and is part of ARO, it's really interesting to sort of hear all of this articulated from the leaders of the office too.
Yeah, and I have to say, this is personal to me. I don't know if Stephen or Kim felt this way, but part of me, when we started out to think about drafting the text for the principles, I was really hopeful that someone else could tell us what these were. Like, oh, this is going to be hard, so maybe someone else who sort of has an outside perspective could look and they'll, and realize kind of like, no, we actually have to do this. So, yeah.
But there were in the interviews that Brooke was doing, there were with everyone in the office, reoccurring themes kept coming up with what people said. The experience of working together with you guys is the positivity of it, the it's super ethical, that it's super supportive, that, you know, so I feel like when I would talk to Brooke and Diana about what they were hearing, that was the kind of, that's sort of where they might have come out of, but then you guys had to sort of go and look in that like world too and see what the language was going to be that suited you.
Yeah,
Right. But yeah, I think it was great that having that interviewing time was really important. Okay, now we're at 7, the last principle. In the book, this ends the book. It doesn't end the book, the conversation does, but this isn't a section where then there's like projects that illuminate it, which I really liked about the structure. I think that was a cool decision. Always keep learning. So I think my feeling about always keep learning is that it just goes back to the overall values, that this is about all the people, this is about running an ethical office, this is about the culture of ARO, the collaborative nature of working on this book with you, you know. So this was an incredible, that always be learning somehow for me, that's what it called to. I thought that maybe we would wrap our this part of the conversation, and we're hoping for questions if you want to ask about anything more about architecture or anything. But what is a favorite or a highlight for you in the book?
I'll go first. I'm going to go, we sort of talked about this, but I'm going to go with the office itself. And so what I mean by that is just all the people who I have personally worked with over almost 10 years. And what was really important about this book project was communicating not just the personality of the office, but also this sort of sense of the group of people who have been a part of ARO, like in whatever instance, there is this sort of like magic in a bottle essence of it. And I think for any architecture firm, I think that's a story that's really hard to find, especially in print, and is rarely communicated. Like there's always a team. Obviously, there's a team behind every project. There's a team behind a book. There's a team behind any built or design project. And so that, to me, was really important. And I think we got it. And I think flipping through this morning was also just a really nice sort of trip down memory lane about people who I get to see every day, who I've worked with for years at a time. And then also just there's like the actual projects too. So Rising Currents as a research project will always be inspiring to me, and all of the visceral memories and moments of any project that I've got to experience for hours or days at a time, like Dia, working with photographers like Elizabeth Bellicella. Like those are, I'm never going to give one answer, and it's probably going to change whenever somebody asks me, but those are the 3 that come to mind.
Yeah, and I come back to some of our projects that are smaller and simpler, just in terms of, whether it's the kayak pavilion in Beacon or the boathouse in Brooklyn Bridge Park, that you can work with an economy of means, but create kind of powerful connections between people and place, and speak to kind of the larger context in which we live, the region and the water in those cases. So those are ones that really excite me. The other category of project is, and types of projects are the ones we've done for art and cultural organizations, whether it's Rothko Chapel or DIA or Judd Foundation, where their mission is really something that we value, and correlating that mission to the artist whose legacy they're involved in perpetuating and maintaining is a really fascinating problem. And realizing that it has to be brought to the present, and so you can't simply freeze these things, in amber, but there's a kind of need for creativity, and they're very collaborative with the clients and the organizations who are involved in running those places, and so that's not one project in particular. But the other one I would say is the Kiora project we were talking about earlier is interesting because Miko and Rebecca were able to enhance the quality of the old negatives that we had, the 4x5, so they sort of plays well with all of the other. It wasn't a digital project. It's from over 20 years ago, but the kind of collaborative ethos of creating that kind of project with Mary Bright and with Johnson Swinghammer, who were the lighting designers at the time, the reductiveness of that, the end result, where you're trying to, in a way, efface kind of conventional interpretation of architecture so that it's something much more ethereal, about just light and space. And so that kind of project was, for me personally, important at the time we were doing it, and hadn't really seen it, especially in the context of our other work, until the book.
Yeah, the scans were kind of old scans that we were working with, and then we got, like, Trifolio, the printer did fresh scans, and we worked on the images, and now they look like they just were taken too, so that was really fun in the book. For me, I'm going to say Rothko Chapel. I've worked with the Menil collection for a long time. I've been to the Rothko Chapel many times, and sort of being in the book, finding out what it takes to make it look so simple and just like so beautiful that it kind of falls away. You just are in the sensibility and the experience. But then also, I just like went to Houston, so I saw the campus you guys are building. So there's one building that's done, the others are underway. So I have a little preview, everyone does, from the book of like what it's going to be like, and then you're standing there. So that's sort of like inside the book, outside the book. I really particularly like that project. So although I have others, I think I would pick another one. And tomorrow I would be like, well, obviously it's Dia, because, you know. Thank you so much for talking about making this book.
You're welcome. Thanks for talking
Thank
to
you.
us.
Okay, does anyone have any questions about?
I have a question. So Adam brought home the near final printout one day,
Mm-hmm.
and I was flipping through it, and I was like, I never knew your work had so much color in it. So I'm wondering how color drove you guys as designers, and how I got that sense from the book.
So the question was about being surprised at how much color, once all the projects were brought together, how much color was flowing throughout many of the projects, which we definitely saw and appreciated in the project too. And we knew we were going to have amazing printing at the other end as well. So we knew that it would be like the colors would all be kind of brought together in a way into this sort of very smooth look overall. There's not like some part that has super printed hot and this other one printed dull or something. Like this is all like really gorgeous and even. I don't know, Rebecca, what do you think? Did we lean in a little, or did we?
There's like neon green on the cover.
Yeah, I guess maybe. Yeah, maybe that's part of our sensibility a little bit too. That we feel very comfortable with color. But so do you. You guys use it. The school that we went to, the use of the colorful walls, like we see it used in this very specific architectural way over and over again in different ways in different projects. And so you're like, okay, well, this is one of the threads through, and we want to show it.
Yeah, from a process standpoint, one thing I hadn't been aware of in the production of the book was the color correction, where we literally went through the actual printed images on the paper that was going to be used, hundreds of them, right? We all sat together and under a certain type of light, you had a box of a certain kind of quality of light to literally go through them and make slight tweaks. And then when Rebecca was on press in Italy, being able to really calibrate that much more finely. And so that's just something I had no idea that was part of the process. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah. That's a good one. I feel like there's a parallel. In the early days of those early 2 days visiting, I was like, well, how come it's so quiet in this space? This room is amazing. And it was, I can't remember what now. I'm forgetting which project I was in. And then you guys explained to me that you make choices in the building materials to make the room not like be super echoey, and it has this really serene feeling as a result. And I was like, well, we are going to have trouble capturing that in the book, except in language. But, I think it's a parallel.
Yeah.
That would be cool, having just like recording the audio of different spaces and then pairing it with the project. It's a good future project.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's actually a question I was going to ask. You guys have talked a little bit or hinted at some of the books that could have been, like other versions of this book that you thought about, and I'm wondering if each of you could give sort of your favorite, what could have been book,
Right. What's the next book? But what are the other books this could have been in your mind?
Wow. That's a good question. Well, I mean,
We can just look around. We're like, well.
one type of book that I really like that would be very different than this would be to pick one building and really go deep into that and document it in a kind of form of, maybe only one photographer or several, but basically to tell the story of something in a very different way. So, and there are really nice examples of that out there.
Barragan House, one of my favorite architecture books.
Yep.
Multiple photographers, one house.
Yep. And some of Zumthor's work has been photographed that way. Like Helen Binet is a pretty well-known architectural photographer who's photographed individual buildings like that. So would be very different because it would only be one thing. But I'm a big fan of that sort of single building book, which apparently is extremely hard is not something that sells very much. But there aren't too many people who are obsessed like I am with individual building. But
it would be another way. I mean, my experience of books, working with artists on books, is that I think that over the course of a monographic project that covers an artist's career, there are all these moments of like discovery, sometimes anxiety and discovery, sometimes pleasure, seeing paintings together that haven't been together forever. There are all these kinds of moments in the process that I think are very, very reflective for the artist. And I think that doing a really deep dive on a single building would have that same kind of like really educational, always be learning way of being like, oh wow, yeah, that these things happened at different times, but we got them to be in synthesis together, or I'd forgotten that by the time I did that. Yeah, I really do find the pleasure of being a book designer often is that kind of moment of discovery that you have. And even laying out something and then changing out a couple pictures. I mean, we did that with you a lot, where we would be tweaking things.
Yeah.
Finding a different picture, and then the meaning changes, and
Totally.
then, yeah.
I think my answer is like not really a design answer at all. I think a cool companion book to this one would be just going to every single project ARO has ever done, just posting up for hours or days at a time and interviewing everyone who actually comes through and uses the project, and just sort of getting that sense of like, how is it lived in or used in just like years later, decades later, or like even months after construction. I think that would be just a cool book to see.
How are we doing?
Maybe one or two more questions.
Okay.
I had a question about the writing. I guess writing can be a process of like expressing what we know, but it can also be this very generative process of learning and like gaining new knowledge, I guess. And I'm just curious, in that writing process, were there things that surprised you in writing about like the principles, for instance, or other sorts of projects, things that surprised you?
So this is a question about the writing. In the process of the writing, Angela, were there things you learned and were surprised by that you want to speak to? Sorry, it was a longer question than that, but I just paraphrased it.
I'm so curious, Zach, what you would say, because part of what was interesting for me was that I spend so much time writing about these projects in different contexts and for different audiences. And so there was definitely a part of like, okay, how to say this for a book format. But I think seeing the projects together, there definitely were sort of different parallels that came up. Like I think at one point seeing Times Square next to Calvin Klein Paris, there was definitely this sort of like through line of Americana that I had never paid attention to or realized. And that was like a fun little tiny moment in one small caption that you can see.
Yeah, and the process of writing the principles, absolutely a process of learning from the process of writing them. They did not just magically appear on the page. And so there was, aside from kind of beginning to figure out how to organize and how many of these should there be, and what do we think we have to say, then it was just how do you say that, and how do you capture, again, the specificity that we feel applies to our work through the principle, or vice versa. So yeah, it was definitely a process of learning through that collaboration and on the principles with Stephen, Kim, and I working on them together.
Do you feel like your conversation was writing, or was it conversation? Like, is it more writing or conversation?
Oh, you mean, what do you mean?
In the
process?
end, was that a writerly process or a talking process?
It was both. I think it was both. I mean, it became more writerly as at a certain point when we knew we had the certain number of sections and whatnot. I think it was more tightly written. But Stevens, what do you think? Or Kim?
I think it was writerly.
Yeah.
It was the process of writing is discovery.
Yeah. So it was iterative. Stephen Cassell, one of my partners, and Kim Yao is also here, basically was saying that it was writerly in the process of discovering, which I agree. It was iterative, and it was kind of the specificity of particular words, and was important. Yeah.
I think tone was also really important to us
That's a good
because
point. Yeah.
there are a lot of us were editing or in the process of writing, but then to have a sort of consistent or cohesive tone was actually pretty difficult, and really, I think that was a really interesting part of the process too, of just, we wanted most of this book to feel like it came from us and that it was written by us and in our voice, and that definitely took this extra level of just writing.
Yeah, the tone that's a really good point in terms of, I mean, I felt like we wanted to share things through the book and not be sort of, dictating what we think is required, but really just saying, here's what we believe, and these are examples of how it's manifest, and hopefully that will be persuasive to people who look at the book, as opposed to sort of being, pedantic through the writing or things like that, for sure. Yeah.
And accessible.
Yep.
A tone and writing that sort of anyone could understand. That wasn't too esoteric, but still intelligent and straightforward.
Okay, so what I'm hoping now is that everyone has your bookmarks and you have the principles, and I really like the principles, and I hope you guys will all get to take them home and sort of think about them pressed against what you're making and designing and drawing and thinking about bringing into the world. And I think that's it. I think we're wrapping up. Do you have any final thoughts about our? Here it is. So.
No, I'm really, thanks so much for 192 Books and Terrence for having us here.
Thank
This
you.
is really amazing. This is our neighborhood bookstore, so we love it, and it's great to be able to talk about the book here.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.